What's going on, y'all? My name is Tommy. Welcome back to the channel. Today, by request, the Skirnir Magus. You know, I see these, and I think, this archetype is hopeless. Someone is fixated on it. Help is what we do, because nothing is hopeless. Oh, ye of little faith. If you're liking what you're seeing, remember to like, subscribe, ding the bell. Stay caught up on me holding on to an old edition of a game and making hopeless things really fucking good. I'm kind of good at it. And if you want to play hopeless things at Hopeful Tables, Patreon is the #1 way to make that happen. And of course, gets you a bunch of other cool things as well, including a Google Sheet where this bad boy's thrown together. But for now, let's dive in. Okie dokie. So before we get into the meat and potatoes, I suppose this is the meat and potatoes. Never mind. Skirnirs. They change out a lot of things that a vanilla Magus does. In some cases, they just move abilities around. In some cases, they cheat different abilities to make what feels like not so much an archetype, but like an alternate class to the Magus. First things first, bad news and good news. The Skirnir casts one fewer spell of each level than normal via diminished spellcasting, like all of the other really cool Magus archetypes. However, the Skirnir begins play with an arcane bond, aka a free refresh of a spell. So that feels like that balances out really well. Likewise, the Skirnir can use their arcane pool to grant an enhancement bonus to a weapon or their shield. They pay costs separately. From 5th level, they can start tacking on animated, arrow catching, arrow deflection, bashing, blinding, any fortification, reflecting, or any spell resistance. This is neat. The deflect arrow style things you can take in 1st edition always feel real bad because you'll take them but then they'll never come up. In this case, you can just turn it on when you need it. Likewise, the Skirnir are proficient with all types of shields from jump, including tower shields. They don't suffer arcane spell failure when casting Magus spells whilst using a shield. They treat their Magus levels as their fighter levels for the purposes of qualifying for shield stuff, and they may from 1st level use spell strike with a weapon or shield bash as opposed to waiting till 2nd. They don't get spell combat until 8th level. They may only do so while wielding their bonded shield. They may use their shield hand to perform somatic components. If they do so, they forfeit the shield's bonus to AC until the beginning of their next turn, until at 19th when that just falls off forever. I think the coolest thing about this build is the spell shield ability. At level 7 as a standard action, a Skirnir may store a Magus spell in their shield by spending 1 point from their arcane pool per level of the spell. This functions as the spell storing weapon ability that activates only on a successful shield bash by the Skirnir, but is not limited to spells of 3rd level or less. At level 16, the Skirnir can activate a stored spell as an immediate action after being struck in combat. That spell can affect the Skirnir instead of affecting the person who punched the Skirnir. And I think that's really cool. The spell storing enchantment is the #1 coolest way for a Magus to double down on all the scary shit that they do. You cast the spell into the weapon. When you hit with the weapon, if you would like to, the effects of the spell affect the person struck. Now imagine a world where that's not capped at 3rd level. Somebody hits you and oops, you've just cast a disintegrate at them. This archetype has all of the bones for being a very defensive focused build. And at the same time, using shields in combat is a very good way to do martial combat. There are feats that let you remove so many penalties from things. Free attacks on criticals. It's really, really good shit. Before we go farther, something I've house ruled in all of my 1st edition games since it came out to great effect. If you play 2nd edition, the shield block reaction, which allows you to mitigate some damage that's coming at you, potentially breaking your shield. It's really cool shit and literally what we do with shields on planet Earth and why we were carrying them around. In 1st edition, I call it an immediate action. The amount of incoming damage is reduced by an amount equal to your shield's hardness. You and the shield take the rest of the damage. Mathematically in 1st edition, that usually shakes out to once per round when someone would hit me, I take no damage, which is really cool when used against the very rocket taggy kinds of builds that exist in 1st edition. Sometimes you have to just shut it off at low levels. But today we will be playing a tiefling, specifically a vanilla tiefling with the prehensile tail, alternate racial trait, allowing us to grab stuff from our person as a swift action with our tail. This will be the thing that holds the rods, the wands, the door opening thing if your GM is kind. Because we're gonna take the Magus shell and we're gonna do a lot of things with it that I feel like you're not supposed to, or at least we won't be screaming shocking grasp at the top of our lungs and swinging a katana around. Rather, we will be taking part in 2-weapon fighting using dwarven war shields. They're light weapons, so dexterity to attack and damage is a go. When wielding 2 of them, you increase your shield bonus by +1. They're super on flavor for us, and honestly, I've wanted to build around them for a very, very long time, so now seems like a great call. For our traits, Pragmatic Activator, because we're going to be super wand based on this build, lets us use our intelligence in place of our charisma for the purposes of playing with wands. And Accelerated Drinker lets you drink a potion as a move action instead of a standard action, as long as you start your turn with your potion wrapped around in your tail. Because we are going to be a very defensive focused thing that will be relying on spells to control the battlefield, buff ourselves, debuff our foes, but also, we have a limited amount of spells, and also we want to cast very big, damagey, dangerous spells, sometimes into our weapons, sometimes as part of a spell strike. Going wide seems to be the best way to go with a Skirnir. Buy potions of buff spells, buy wands of buff spells. Eventually we will be crafting wands of buff spells, which means we can cast spells from those wands using our caster level instead of the minimum, which means they'll stay competitive as it goes on forward and they don't just fall off when we're like wand of greasing the floor. Doing all of that will help us stay in the fight longer, help us be able to influence the fight for longer. As a Punisher build that does net less damage but disincentivizes everyone from attacking or really doing anything other than strictly what we want them to do. As always, we will be building under the elephant in the room modification we do here at the channel. Follow this card if you don't know what that is. Feats with improved or greater variance will tick up automatically as soon as we qualify. Light weapons will get dexterity to attack and damage automatically, because otherwise you have to spend gold in a feat to make it happen, and that sucks. For our ability score priority, you want to have a really high dex and a really high int. You want those to be about as equal as possible because they're equally important to you. Constitution and Wisdom will keep us from dying or being confused. Strength and Charisma, we want enough strength to not be encumbered by our shields until at least we get like muleback cords or a permanent anthaul. Charisma, don't need it at all. For our feats out the gate, we'll grab Improved Shield Bash, so when we're hitting people with our shield, we still get our shield bonus to our AC. Then Shield Focus to increase the AC bonus granted by any shield we are wielding by 1. At level 5, we'll take Stumbling Bash, so when we hit somebody in the head with this big sheet of metal, they take a -2 to their AC until the end of your next turn, which is huge for everyone. This bonus is untyped, so that means it stacks with everything except for itself. So like stacks with Shaken or Sickened or any other debuffs that might be wildly thrown around the room or making them prone when we're constantly casting things that make them prone. Our first Magus bonus feat comes online here. We'll grab Craft Wand. This allows us to craft a wand of any 4th level or lower spell that we know. There are ways to cheese the hell out of crafting if that's your table. If it's not your table, a day for each 1,000 gold in its base price means usually you'll be spitting out the wands you want in a day, burning half of 750 gold. This is probably around the time the build feels the most online. We won't be 2-weapon fighting for a little while until we can spell combat with a shield in our hand. I think our early game is a Dwarven War Shield in one hand, our offhand unoccupied, tails fumbling through pockets and things. Oh, also, by the way, I should probably mention this because this is hella important. Our first Arcana that we will be taking is a Familiar. We'll grab an Ambassador Familiar, which raises its Charisma instead of raising its Intelligence. Since Familiars use their Master's ranks in a given skill, it's gonna struggle at the beginning to hit that 20 to cast that spell, but eventually it will get there reliably. Since Ravens possess an appendage that could hold a wand, their talons, and because it has 6 intelligence, it's as smart as the average fighter. It innately understands what the thing is, will be doubling down our ability to throw down spells, and that go wide strategy that the Skirnir is. I think by default a Wand of Grease will go a long way on something flying around over your head, making areas of difficult terrain, making people fall prone. Never underestimate the value of greasing someone's shield or greasing someone's weapon. It can take people out of the fight just as fast as Hold Person can. Later on, something like a Wand of Scorching Ray and your Raven flying around shooting down while you're holding the line, or maybe even at this point if you're willing to spring for it, something like Muleback Cords again, so the Raven, a tiny little burb, can carry a wand in either talon to like turn 1, grease all around you, you just don't move. Then fly up and start scorching raying or greasing around in just kind of random places where they move off to protect everyone else. While they're falling prone, you're setting up, your friends are dealing damage. It takes a little bit of setup time, but I think the payoff is really cool. Speaking of grease, we've said grease a lot. Next up, Spell Focus Conjuration, which should auto-tick up to its greater variant. Will both make our grease stronger and affect a lot of other really neat spells that you don't often see Magi cast. Think spells like Stinking Cloud, Web, Glitter Dust. Spells that we really want to stick get a +2. A lot of conjuration spells don't interact with spell resistance as well. That feels relevant to point out here. Next at level 9, we'll take 2-weapon fighting, which at this point in our career will automatically tick up to its improved variant and will eventually tick its way to greater, saving us a couple of extra feats and turning this build from the 1 shield and free hand to 2 shields gonna hit you twice. There's a lot of language in the Skirnir that calls for a shield. I think it's reasonable to assume it's calling for the bonded object, and you can't just double spell storing both shields for a lot of big shenanigans. At least not the cool spell storing anyway. In any case, I really like builds that feel mechanically different later on and have like a different look or a different vibe as they level, because it keeps them very fresh, and in a long running campaign sometimes you just need that. Double Slice at level 11 if your GM is kind and will let that tick off dexterity. Otherwise, drop this character, come back with a tier 0 wizard. There's a lot of discourse on Twitter right now about why the first edition community got kind of bad there towards the end. I'm not saying that I agree with that. I love first edition, but I have been at the table with those people, and those builds were the reason why it was bad. I digress. Shield Slam alongside it. From here forward, anyone you're hitting with the Shield Bash are also hit with a free Bull Rush attack, subbing your attack roll for the combat maneuver check involved. It doesn't provoke. Should they hit a wall, they're knocked prone. This pushes people back into area of effect spells in a really satisfying way. Quick bit of story time. A very long time ago, I was playing a Duskblade in a 3.5 game, and we had to defend a small choke point from an invading army. How did we do that, you ask? Well, the Druid cast Entangle. We're in a swamp. There's lots and lots of things they're going to run through that are going to grab them. The Scout is skirmish striking from one tower to the other, getting sneak attack. It was weird. Someone gives me a polearm, I'm stabbing into the Entangle, and the Paladin who doesn't want to step into the Entangle and get stuck just bull rushes people back in as they come out so they can continue to get the debuff. That's as much of a combat ender as anything else, though sometimes it takes a couple turns, pushing someone back into the black tentacles, through the wall of fire, god dare I say, off the side of a fucking cliff, and anything in between. It's super cool. Next up, Spell Focus Transmutation. Why? Because I'm real tired of casting Disintegrate at my players, watching them pass their save and then taking way, way less damage. I'm so tired of it that I'm going to put it on this build. And that's the spell I really want to put in the super spell storing. You touch my shield, you die. Transmutation spells that require saves are a little more on the few and far between side. Baleful Polymorph is a thing. Flesh to Stone if you're feeling really, I'm just going to stop that person forever and ever and ever. Next up, as soon as we qualify, Shield Master. Once we take this, we do not suffer any penalties on attack rolls made with a shield while you are wielding another weapon like another shield. This ticks off the reckless attack penalty. Don't call it Piranha Strike. This ticks off the 2-weapon fighting penalty. Your shield's enhancement bonus to attack and damage is taken from the shield's enhancement, which means you can theoretically just go sell your shields and get new ones that are now better moving on forward. We have a base attack bonus of 11 by the time this comes on, so then presuming we are always leaving power attack on because we're very smart, and the penalty from 2-weapon fighting, our attacks casually all just got a +5 here. So good. Shout out to the ranger that can do this way earlier. I digress. Next up, bashing finish. Whenever you crit with a melee weapon, you get a free shield bash against the same target using the same bonus as a free action. This isn't going to proc as much as if you're wielding like a keen scimitar in a shield, but the amount of times you're throwing dice around, I think statistically speaking, you're going to see it happen at least once in a given campaign. Quicken spell on the Magus bonus feat side, then lastly, improved initiative. Say it with me, kids, because if you made it this far, why the fuck not? For our Magus Arcana, again, familiar out the gate to 2-for-1 all of our action economy, followed by Spell Blending. Spell Blending allows you to take spells from the wizard list that did not appear on the Magus list and add them to your spell list with a little bit of restriction. Hey, fun fact, kids. Did you know Mage Armor is not on the Magus list? Yeah, I don't know who dropped the ball there. We take this at level 6, so since it's not the highest level spell we can cast, we could grab a couple more. The big takeaway here is Stunning Barrier. Not only does Stunning Barrier, of course, buff out all 3 of your saves and your AC, but more importantly, when people hit you in combat, they might get stunned, reducing their action economy to a literal standstill, causing everyone else to run forward and win that big damage race. Alongside it, we'll take Line in the Sand. You could also take like Protection from X or Summon Monster, if you think those would be better for you. But a 5-foot burst centered on you, in which you get an extra number of attacks of opportunity equal to your intelligence, feels pretty alright in a world where folks will theoretically be standing up from prone in your presence quite a lot. At level 9, we'll get Spell Blending one more time for Greater Stunning Barrier, which is not discharged until you've stunned a number of dudes equal to your caster level. Then we'll take Spell Scars. This allows us to prepare tattoos on our skin which function as scrolls, essentially giving us 18 total spell levels worth of scrolls we can inscribe on ourselves that we don't need to see and don't need to like fumble through our pockets, and also several other spells floating around to get around the Magus's biggest problem, just running out of resources when trying to do more than evocate someone's face off. Then Reflection last at the end of the game for a free turn the spell back on the Rune Lord type effect. Anywho, before we get around to our key magic items, first things first, in the optimized party, follow this card right up here. It's a Punisher. Stop them from doing things, hurt them when they do the things you don't want them to do, keep them away from your friends who are taking them off the battlefield so much faster. It's just the best. So far as where to play this build feels like it would fit in almost anywhere. The smaller the battlefield, the easier to keep people locked up, so dungeon crawly things like, say, Shattered Star, as opposed to big open battlefield type things, becomes considerably easier to facilitate that. Because there's a lot of crafting for making a lot of wands and things, campaigns with a lot of downtime like Rise of the Rune Lords, or god dare I say Jade Regent. Wild. Sidebar, Jade Regent is the coolest adventure path in all of Pathfinder. If you just sideline Amiko, talk to your players, be like, hey, one of y'all's last name is Kaijutsu, you're gonna learn some shit about yourself, and your friends really want to help you achieve your destiny, and suddenly you've removed the Mary Sue and made an actual alright narrative, which I really want to run. End digression. This build will likely struggle against things that are considerably larger and therefore hard to bull rush, things that can fly so we don't have the ability to lock them up as easy, or god forbid they chase after our familiar. But even then, the Magus is good enough that it can just pivot to, alright, I'm going to cast an evocation spell through this shield and then beat you with it. Everything I've added on to the build to make it function more as what it is intended to is all very extra, and since it's being done with magic items and things, we can pivot back to your standard issue evocation dot character real easy. Now, let's talk about some magic items. For our key items, the big 6, always super important. Follow this card right up here. Magi like having Pearls of Power for extra spells, but really I feel like because we're going to be relying on wands so much, we don't necessarily need to invest. We'd rather have the cheaper, more efficient, long-running thing. But speaking of wands, a spring-loaded wrist sheath should be able to fit one, should let you pop one out into your hand or tail as a swift action in combat if you need to drop a wand and switch a wand. Additionally, the spell storing enchantment can be applied to your armor to do the same thing that it does when we use Greater Spell Shield. They both cost an immediate action, so we can't 2-for-1, but having more in the tank, pun not intended, when you're getting focused down on is pretty freaking useful. One of my favorite things to do with Magi rings true here as well, or really any caster with a familiar. Grab a spell storing Amulet of Mighty Fists and cast your big damaging spells on your familiar's enchantment, and suddenly you have a Shocking Grasp cruise missile that can fly, tag someone, do a bunch of damage when you can't exactly get where you need to go. If you're planning on doing this, invest in the big 6 for your familiar as well so they can tank a hit before they fly well out of range of whatever the hell they just attacked. But yeah, the Skirnir is a very simple yet very effective build. What you see is what you get. Invest in a very go wide strategy. Use your magic to lean into that thing you want to do, get them to hit you, then they get hurt, then you hurt them. It's a very simple process, and that's all the time we have for today. What do y'all think? Have we played the Skirnir? Have we played Magi in a very non-traditional, I'm gonna put too many d6 directly in your face kind of way? Let me know down in the comments. As always, thank y'all so much for watching. We'll see you next time.